ESG Decoded, where we navigate the evolving landscape of environmental, social, and governance, ESG. Join me, Amanda Hsieh, and Erika Schiller as we explore the intersection of sustainability, innovation, and ethical leadership. I'm your host, Amanda Hsieh, and today I have with me Kaitlyn Kelleher, a senior associate on our sustainability policy and advisory team, to talk about greenhushing. I think are familiar with the term greenwashing, where we're overstating perhaps claims of environmental benefits. But greenhushing is another term that we probably want to be familiar with and understand the implications. What is it? What's the implications of it? And we'll dig into it with Kaitlyn today. Hey, Kaitlyn, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. It's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit more. Let's just start off with the basics. What is greenhushing?
Yeah, so I think you covered the big point is that greenhushing is not greenwashing. I think as I really started diving into this and having conversations with people and asking them, hey, have you ever heard of greenhushing? A lot of them was like, yeah, greenwashing. That's where companies overstate their environmental claims. But no, so there's a distinction between greenhushing and greenwashing. So we see with greenhushing that there is a potential trend of companies and firms across the world kind of stepping back a bit from communicating on climate action and sustainability goals. Maybe perhaps amidst fears of heightened scrutiny from customers, from investors, potential regulatory implications. So rather than making exaggerated environmental claims as we see with greenwashing, they're instead being a little bit more quiet about the action that they're taking within climate action in general.
And so, what are some of the implications of when companies do this? Because it is a fine line, right? You don't want to get in that greenwashing stage, but I think there's a fine line. Anyways, tell me more.
Yeah, so some of the implications, I think the big thing here is that halting all communications, any significant communications around climate action has potential to be detrimental to pushing climate action forward in general. So a decrease in reporting on targets, on actions, on what physical measures and strategies are being used to tackle climate could have impacts beyond the firms that are reporting on it and just impact industries and peer action in general. So I think we see a lot of times that leaders within industry inspire action to peers within that industry. And so if fewer of these sustainability focused firms are reporting and talking about climate, there may be less incentive for peers or for perhaps climate laggards to then meet the standards that the leaders are setting. So this loss of competitive pressure could potentially stagnate climate progress, could decrease pressure on big emitters, and then really a reduction in communications could kind of lead to fewer opportunities to learn. So firms learning from each other, sharing their lessons learned, sharing the best practices that they've learned, sharing some of the innovative technologies or strategies or techniques that they're employing to tackle emissions reductions. There could just be less opportunity for that to happen.
And what degree are we seeing this happen in companies?
In doing research for this blog and this podcast, came across a lot of differing opinions. I think a recent report from the New Climate Institute really questioned if there was evidence for greenhushing, and they kind of see a different story and even perhaps see the same story, but see it as more of a benefit. So instead of finding just overall reduction in climate communications, they see instead a reduction or perhaps retraction of unsubstantiated climate claims. So retracting unsubstantiated carbon neutrality claims.
So it sounds like more of a kind of a correction or adjustment of how they're communicating what they're doing. I'd say I don't have any evidence to back this up, but what I think about is in quarterly calls for public companies, there has been, I remember reading an article about less mentions of the word ESG, less talks in those quarterly investor presentations and meetings. But at the same time, I don't think climate action is slowing down. What are you seeing? What's the research show?
I agree with that completely. I think, especially lately, there has been not perhaps pushback to ESG, to discussions of ESG, but there's definitely internally been a lot of discussions on whether this is the term that companies want to use when they talk about how they're addressing social and environmental and climatic issues. I think we still see that the drivers for climate action are still much stronger than any drivers against climate action, and even perhaps stronger than the drivers to kind of keep quiet and not report on climate action. So there's still a lot of demand from customers, whether that's like business customers or end consumers, demands to have environmentally positive or climate positive products to kind of set net zero targets and emissions reductions targets. And there's still a lot of requests from investors and businesses and just everything within the value chain to make improvements in like carbon content of products to like start churning out lower carbon products, kind of meet demands from everybody at every stage in the value chain. So I don't think any like communications might be slowing and they might be changing, and the way that companies are approaching communications and external communications might be changing, but I think all of the evidence still shows that they're still very active in taking climate action, and there's still a lot of resources and funding and thought being put into how companies can address their emissions reductions goals, how they can work positively towards addressing climate change, and really still working to push all of this forward.
With the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, with the new, or not new, but with the EU's CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, coming into force, I'm thinking that there's going to be more nuanced and specific communications where it will be perhaps more specific disclosure on climate or the material topics as identified for CSRD compliance. And also perhaps the channels of communication will be different. So maybe it won't be in the investor report. Maybe it will be in the sustainability report. Maybe it'll move eventually into a 10K or an annual report. But what do you think about how these legislation and regulations are going to change this?
Okay, so I think the current state of primarily voluntary disclosures and really anything around climate communications, especially in the US, being quite voluntary, means that companies have to consider the risk when they choose to disclose anything around climate. And so while that's still voluntary, there's going to be some companies choosing to do it, some companies choosing that risk isn't worth it for them, so they'll just stay quiet, period. I think then as we shift towards a situation where certain climate disclosures are mandatory, that means that first of all, everybody's going to have to do it, or those subject to it will have to do it. And so choosing to disclose is no longer you putting yourselves out there for unnecessary scrutiny, because everybody's going to be opened up to the same sort of scrutiny. And so I think that removes one facet of the consideration when it comes to climate communications, is that you won't be subjecting yourself to an unnecessary risk. And then on the other, not even other side of the coin, just another facet that might make this, I guess, a positive facet of this, is that when these disclosures are regulated, the metrics and what you're going to have to disclose are going to be much more standardized. And so that's one, benefits for apples to apples comparisons across companies, less considerations for kind of choosing what to disclose when you're just told what you have to disclose. And I think it'll remove a lot of the uncertainty around the risks and weighing the pros and cons of making certain disclosures when you have to do it and all your peers have to do it. So then I think that really pushes the focus from whether or not you should be communicating to actually making action, because everybody's having to report on this. And if you want this, you want your customers, you want your investors, you want your stakeholders to all see that your climate action and your goals and your targets and your progress are all positive, then this just becomes another avenue to like report on that and differentiate yourself from your peers.
Another thing I'm thinking about is, or a question in my head is, what would be your recommendations for companies trying to navigate and balance all of this? What would you recommend? What would your suggestions be?
There's two areas of focus that would best help companies create a very robust communication strategy. And part of that is the communications themselves. But even before the communications, it's having the data and the actions and like the internal records to back up those communications. So when you're thinking of setting net zero targets, don't just publish a target without data to back it up. Make sure that you have the data on your footprints, show that you've done the due diligence that these targets are achievable, so that you've done the due diligence and kind of thinking about the ways in which you will actually achieve these targets. And then so that when you do publish a net zero target, it's not unsubstantiated. Yes, there's a lot of uncertainties when it comes to what technology is going to become available, how are things going to progress, etc. But showing that you've done some sort of work to show that this target is within the realm of possibility, that you've considered how to get there, and you're not just making a greenwashed claim of, yeah, we'll be net zero by 2030. Showing you've done something to consider whether or not that's actually achievable.
The other thing I think about with that, Caroline, too, is also not only the data, but also maybe I'll say like the budget to implement. Like, where you are, what your footprint is today, right? You know what your target is. You have the data to back up the kind of the plan to get there. And where I'm seeing some companies struggle is how much is this going to cost? And do we have the essentially the above budget, approved or blessed? And maybe not, if you're setting a net zero for 2050, of course, that's not necessarily, all the way to 2050, but at least immediately, not only how do we achieve this, but how do we make sure we have the money secured within the company to take these activities? So you mentioned there's, I think, two things. What was the other thing that you thought was really important for companies to consider to
Oh,
be?
yeah, sorry.
Mhm.
The
No,
actual
go ahead. No, we got a little off track. Sorry, my fault.
having the data to back it up, that's the first piece. And then making sure that your communications are honest and transparent and genuine. So make sure that you're learning from or pulling from your actual data, and that your communications are accurate in representing the reality of the situation. So honesty is the best policy. just don't exaggerate, don't make overstated claims, just really err on that side of avoiding greenwashing, while also being truthful and honest about the challenges that come with achieving carbon neutrality or net zero.
I think back to those principles that the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, has laid out for what makes a high quality report. Also, a SASB has something similar, and many of the sustainability reporting frameworks have these kind of guiding principles of what makes a high quality report. And what you're saying in there is definitely included, right? Being accurate, being transparent, having a complete picture, a balanced picture of what's happening. So I think that falls exactly with, those guidelines, and each guideline has a slightly different twist on it. But I mean, that's what it's sometimes harder in reality than it is in principle, though.
Yeah.
For any of our listeners who want to read more about this, look for the blog article that was published on climbco.com. We'll make sure we link it in the show notes so it's easy for everyone to find and to read. And Caroline, thank you so much for your time today to educate us about greenhushing.
Of course. Thank you, Amanda.
And now I'm happy to have my co-hosts join me. I have Kaitlyn Allen and Erika Schiller. Hey, Kaitlyn. Hey, Erika.
Hello. Hey.
We're here for a special announcement. Kaitlyn, you want to take it away?
Absolutely. Yes. So I have some bittersweet news to share, and that is that I am leaving ClimbCo to pursue my startup, MendIt, and also to bring balance back to my life. But that also means, sadly, that this is my last episode as a host of ESG Decoded. And it's very bittersweet for me. This was my first experience, obviously, in podcasting. I was starting this with Amanda 3 years ago plus, which feels like lifetimes. And we were so grateful to have Erika join as a host last year. And I just want to first thank our audience. Our audience has kept us in between number 1 and 2 in our category since the first, believe it was first 3 months of launching 3 years ago. So that's pretty incredible, pretty phenomenal. And it's all because of you, our listeners, that continue to engage with us and listen to episodes when they come out and share your feedback with us. I also want to thank our guests who've all been amazing.
Kaitlyn, thank you so much for sharing your ideas and your experience. I wanted to ask you, what has been your favorite episode that you recorded? I'm sure it's hard to pick just one, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, a favorite is so hard. It's really hard to choose a favorite. But I think I could note the ones where I really experienced an aha moment myself. And so personally, I would say if I had to choose, there were 2 episodes that where game-changing moment in my understanding of ESG and sustainability. And for me, with Dr. Hsieh Rajgopal on interpreting the ESG movement through accounting. So when he started to explain how the way that we actually do accounting, financial accounting and reporting, and how that is kind of a time capsule in a way that's linked to a previous time without the complexities of today's society, that was a huge aha moment for me. Because so much of our financial system is, tied up in how we do financial reporting, and that concept of ESG, or quote extra financial reporting, being important because we live in a very different world than when those statements were originally created. So that was huge for me with Dr. Hsieh Rajgopal. And then the other one I would say that kind of right around the same time, and these were both part of our ESG Paradigm Shift series, was when I was with Greg Watson. And that was the episode, I believe it was titled, Greg Watson Discusses the No Single Right Way Approach to ESG. And for me, the aha moment there was kind of similar to the one with Shiva, but focused on valuation. So how we do valuations of companies and the outdated way that process is done to arrive at a number of this is what we believe this company is worth. I thought those 2 were really, really, they were important for me in my deepening my understanding of the bigger systemic shifts happening that we talk about a lot on ESG Decoded. It was always fun to have clients on or partners. Like, for example, we had our board member, Leela Ramnath, talking about, Climeco's board member, Leela Ramnath, talking about trends in private equity, which I thought was really cool. Kaidi Johnson from Motorola Solutions, a client, it was really fun to hear her perspective as a, kind of deep in the weeds of being the corporate attorney and the ESG reporting process. I thought that was really cool. And then, of course, going with Bill Flutterbach, our CEO, to Oklahoma City to interview Mark Behrman with LSB Industries, which is Climeco's first client, if I recall correctly, to talk about industrial decarbonization. I would say those are other ones that were really just notable and special for Climeco, and just like extra fun for me. And there's so many more. I'm sorry if I didn't say your name. I've really, truly loved every episode I've gotten to do with people.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. How about y'all?
I think, like you said, Kaitlyn, it's hard to pick a favorite. And I love doing this podcast because I get to learn from so many people. Last week, I was at the University of Texas at Austin doing a keynote for the Global Sustainability Leadership Institute. And I did use a quote from one of our podcast guests. It was David Lattin.
That's cool.
David Lattin from Logitech. So, this was a keynote for the inaugural class. So I wanted to hopefully inspire them to pursue careers in sustainability and really to try to make a change in their world, whatever that means to them. So it was really nice to be able to use a quote from him where he says, everyone can do something. No one can do everything, but we can all do something, and every role can have an impact. And I was happy to see a lot of the students nodding there. So I'll leave it at that. Erika, how about you?
Yeah, I thought a lot of them were super interesting to listen to. And frankly, I was a listener long before I became a host. One that stood out to me that I really enjoyed was with Rick Alexander, where he talks about shareholder commons. The episode was called Rick Alexander Explains the Relationship Between ESG and Modern Portfolio Theory. But I thought it was really interesting, the concept of businesses trying to create more value by externalizing costs, but that puts the cost on society or other folks. So there needs to be another approach, another shareholder in the room that thinks more broadly. So yeah, I thought that was really eye-opening and just a perspective I hadn't considered before.
Well, Kaitlyn, we are going to miss you on the podcast.
I know,
Absolutely.
I am too, but maybe, it will go on without me. And so do y'all have any previews to share? Like what's in store this year for ESG Decoded?
I'm excited about, we're going to do a cross podcast collaboration. So I'm very excited for that one. It will be about on-site energy. I don't know. What about you, Erika?
I'm excited to bring on more of our customers to talk about, direct ESG issues and how we helped them in their businesses. I think it's really interesting to hear, directly from customers about challenges, overcoming them, and help our listeners consider how that might apply to their business. And then I also think it's fun to dive really into some of the core challenges in the hard to abate sector that at Climeco we really focus on, around cement, around petrochemicals, just those really hard to solve problems. I love kind of getting into those and talking about what are some practical solutions. So I think there's a lot of fun episodes coming up, and that I'm excited to continue to work with Amanda and bring interesting topics to our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to continue listening and hear your voices often. And, it's going to be continue to get better and better with time and as we go deeper on certain topics, doing collaboration. So I'm super excited for the future of ESG Decoded. And it's been just such an honor to be part of this. Amanda, you and I, could we have even imagined what we would do, like what we'd be doing in 3 years? I know I could not have when we started this. And, again, that just goes back to our loyal listeners and our audience. And we're just so grateful for all of the support and the shout outs over the years. And, we'll continue to be, but it's just been amazing. And I'm grateful for every stage of this journey, and go ESG Decoded.
Well, we're grateful for you co-hosting with us for so long and wish you all the best on your new adventure.
Absolutely. Looking forward to seeing your success as well, Kaitlyn.
Whether you're a seasoned ESG practitioner or embarking on your sustainability journey, ESG Decoded is your trusted source for inspiration and actionable insights for responsible business practices. Subscribe on your favorite streaming platforms to be notified of new episodes drop bi-weekly on Tuesday mornings, and connect with us at ESG Decoded on social media or by visiting www.climeco.com.